Good morning, good afternoon, or good evening, depending on what time you're listening to this. Today's webinar is about cross-platform to Windows, macOS, and Linux. And we're going to be using the FirePower X controls from wall-to-wall software. And my name is Ian Barker. I'm an Embarcadero MVP, and you can reach me on about.me/Ian Barker, or go to my blog and read all about this presentation and several others I've done, www.code.show.com/blog. And today we've also got with us in the live question and answers, Roy Wall from Wall-to-Wall Software. And you can visit Roy's site at www.wall-to-wall.com. What are we going to talk about today? Well, the presentation is going to be by myself, by the way, so you can hear me, but at the end, Roy's taking part in the live Q&A. We're going to write a small program which accesses a live MySQL database. We're going to run and debug that on Windows and Linux. We're going to take another program, actually one of Roy's demos, compile it, and then run it on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. And then we're going to take a look at the excellent FirePower X controls whilst we do that from wall-to-wall software, as I mentioned earlier on. Wall-to-wall FirePower X is a really great set of controls which work on multi-device apps, so FMX and FireMonkey. They work on Windows 32, 64, Linux. In fact, specifically Ubuntu, you need to install FMX Linux for it to work, but apart from that, they're fine. Mac OS, iOS and Android, there's absolutely nothing they don't run on. Great set of cross-platform controls. Go to wall-to-wall.com/firepower and read more about it. And Roy from Wall-to-Wall, who's the president, will be answering questions later with me during the live presentation. Follow Roy on twitter.com/Roy S. Wall. Program number one is actually an emulation, shall we say, or a very quick copy of a program that is actually commercially available, one that I wrote. And it is an in-out board. So what it shows is people who've clocked in and clocked out, and it shows those colors in those people that have clocked in green, those people that have clocked out in red, and those people it doesn't know about in a darker color. Or amber if they want to, warning that we don't know whether they're in or out. And this is used for people on receptions, but it's also used for things like fire drills and stuff like, oh, where is everybody, who's in? So we need to go and know whether we need to search for people who might be trapped in the building, and you only need to look for the people that are marked in green. The prerequisites, well, you need to have Linux, and specifically I used Ubuntu. I got a VMware ready-made image from osxboxes.org, which is a really great site. You need a fairly fast connection to download it. It was a pretty hefty chunk of data. And you'll also need to install PA server on it. And the link down there, .wiki, shows you the steps you need to actually install it for Linux application development. The prerequisites for the Linux are that you need to install the MySQL library for my particular app. I'm not going to actually give that demo app out because it uses some proprietary information, but if you do want to try and connect to MySQL, you need to follow the instructions on the Embarcadero.wiki for that. The MySQL is a moving target, and they accidentally, well, it's not accidentally, but the information is a little bit out of date. We are raising a issue about that, so someone will fix this, but at the moment it says put lib MySQL client 20 on there, and with the latest version of Ubuntu that's not going to work. You just need to change the 20 to 21 and it'll work fine. Red Hat actually uses a different version anyway. I didn't use Red Hat, so I can't tell you whether it worked out the box, but certainly for Ubuntu it didn't work for me, so I needed to make a change. Anyway, let's take a look. It's demo time. So we're going to show you two programs today. The first program is actually a very quick copy of a commercial program that I wrote some time ago. And what this is doing is connecting to a MySQL database, and it's reading some employee information about whether they're in or out. This is all test data, by the way. These are not real people. I use algorithms to create all these names. For people that are in, it shows green. For people that are out, it shows red. And for people it doesn't know about because it hasn't heard from them for 24 hours or something like that, it will show them in a dark color, or I can make them come up in yellow or amber. So that's kind of a warning. And this is used by people around the UK and in parts of the US. They have these on the receptions and it shows in and out, things like that. Now this actual commercial program is a bit more sophisticated than one we're going to do today. For example, it shows notifications on the desktop. You can click on one of these and say, I want to know about Aaron Adams. And when his status changes, then it'll show me a little desktop notification and go bing, and up comes a little piece of notification, or toast as they call it in macOS, to just let you know that someone's clocked out. So you might be trying to, you know, when is Jim McKeith clocking in, for example, and before you want to phone him up or send him an email. And when it changes, you'll get the notification. We're not going to do the notifications today because they're a bit more complicated when you're going cross-platform, but this is the commercial program. So what I have is I remoted into another machine because of the way my recording session's set up. And we have here VMware, and it's running Ubuntu. And I've just installed this to play around with just for now. And it's running a version of Ubuntu that I downloaded from OS X boxes, which I showed you earlier on. And what I've done is I've installed the PA server. And the PA server is the program that acts as glue between whatever your target system is, Mac or Linux, as it is in this case. And it just sits there and it receives commands from your Delphi program. When you compile, it actually uses this machine, your remote machine, Linux or Mac OS, to do the compilation so that you get a native program. It also allows you to debug. Now, all I need to do to run it on this machine is /PA server, like this. It'll ask me for a password. And you should always put a password on because you are opening a port to this machine. And at that point, it's now running. And as you can see, it says it's running on port 642.1.1. If I click I, it shows me which IP address it's running on. So this is all routed through this local machine. Okay. If I just minimize that for now and go into Delphi, if I go up to here and choose for connection, if I type in the first few characters of connection, it'll ask me for connection profile manager page. Okay. Now I've created a new multi-device app, and I've set these connections up in advance. You can read through that on the links that I've shown you on the slides, but here's my Linux 64-bit. Remember the IP address that we got from that machine, which is in here, 192.168.88.129, port 64.1.1, which is from there as well, and the password, which is the password that we set up. And as you can see, if I click on test, it works. Now, after you do that the first time, you will need to also get down the Ubuntu or Linux SDK. It's quite a lot of SDK to come down. So if you're going to do this in a hurry and do a presentation ready for showing to a lot of people, for example, you don't want to be doing it the day before the presentation, as I did, because I found out it takes an awful long time. Now, the Mac, I've done exactly the same thing. This is the IP address for Mac. Here's the port, and on the Mac is running the PA server with the same password. Now, what that means is, if I just briefly show you the program, what I've done is I've created this multi-device app, and I've put on here a grid. Okay. Now, the grid that I'm using is the grid from wall to wall, and it is the main FirePower X grid. Very, very good grid. And I'm going to show you some of the things it can do in a moment. And the next program I'll show you is actually their full demo of some of the components. Really great set of components, work perfectly on Windows, Linux, and Mac OS. I know this because I'm doing it myself. And it's very fast. It will also work on iOS and Android. I'm not going to show you that today because we've only got so much time to demonstrate these things, but it's a great set of components. Now, what I have here is some FireDAC components. Okay, so the first thing you need to do when you use FireDAC is to put a connection on. Now, I'm going to be connecting to MySQL. Okay, and the MySQL database is this one, and I'm going to be running this query. And what this query does is a fairly complicated one, so I'm not going to go into detail, but it basically pulls up all of the information for those employees, which I can then act on the grid. Okay, and this is MySQL 8, and in order for it to work on Linux for the client side, I had to install the client side libraries. Again, the links in the slides and on my blog will tell you how to do that. But all you need to do is select a FireDAC connection, and the driver link is the first thing. And all you're doing there is saying, I want the MySQL driver. On Linux, it's going to automatically pick up the right thing for the binding. I'm going to say I need a connection, and in my connection parameters, I'm not going to show you them because it's got some confidential information in there, but there is a username, a password, and a host already built in. Now, in the real commercial version, you actually can optionally change those, but I'll just set these up, jury-rigged it, shall we say, for this demonstration. And I've then got a query. Now, the query is the query that I just showed you in MySQL in here, okay? And if I go into the query editor, after a couple of seconds, you'll see that here's all the query, just exactly the same as I had in the MySQL thing. Now, the way that the grid works from wall to wall is that it wants a data source. Now, if you're used to VCL, this is not the data source that's a T data source. This is actually a bind source, you'll see here. And the way that you get a bind source of the right type is you put your query component on, and then you say right click and say add bind source. Okay. And what that will do is that will create this little target here, the bind source. And it's basically like a funnel, shall we say, between the query component and the grid component. And we go into there and specify that bind source DB1. So there's our bind source, and it connects together. At that point, the grid now understands what columns I've got in my query. And you remember, there's my query, and you see down the bottom here, there's all the fields that are available. And all I've done is I've gone into here and I've selected which fields, the columns I want to remove and display, and then change some of the titles to some of these things as well. Okay. Now, I have also put a style manager component on here, a style book, sorry, component, and happen to select one of the custom styles. And you can get those from the Get It Packet Manager. Once you do Package Manager, once you do that, you can choose one of these styles and have whatever style you like. I have to have chosen a dark one because I like dark, and it shows up a little bit on a monitor. I've also, the only other components really I've got on here is a timer, because I want a cool little message to appear here and disappear, saying whether it's connected or not. One of wall-to-wall's checkboxes, there's a TWW checkbox from them. All of their components start with TWW. And this has got some nice little extra features that you won't see elsewhere. The ability to add the check, which you can't see at the moment. If I just turn it on the check, you can see the checkbox probably on your resolution just down here. I can put some padding around it, some other things as well. Now I can do that with padding on the control, but it's kind of cool. It's data aware, although I'm not using that particular facility, and got lots of other nice little features as well. I'm not going to go through those. Roy will be joining us for the live Q&A. If you're watching the replay, you might not see those, but Roy's details are on the slides as well, so you will actually be able to see what's going on. Okay, I've got a button here, which is a TWW button, which is called Connect. And if we look at the code, get rid of that for a second, It's not that difficult. Okay, so when we click on the connect button, if it's not already connected, then we, if it is already connected, then we actually disconnect it. So the button is the button down here is a two-way button, effectively. You can connect and disconnect. Okay, and if it's not already saying connect, then what it will do is connect to the database. And all it does with the database, because I've already set the connection details up, it will connect to the database, assuming everything works, then it will connect to the database. Show timed message is just a little routine here that I've set up. So it sets this status label up, which is down here. Status label with some text, and then fires a timer, and when the timer's finished, it just sets the status label to nothing, so it disappears, and it's just a cool way of showing a message, one of those things. Now, a very interesting feature, as I said, there's not an awful lot of code to this. The only other interesting feature that this program is doing is on the grid. Up for a second and pin it. We have got a thing called on custom draw cell. And what I'm doing with the on custom draw cell is when the cell data type, when the cell type is a data cell, in other words, not a header cell, it will then look at it and say, is it one of the fixed columns? Well, actually, we don't have any fixed columns. I kind of stole this from all-to-all's example. But if it's not one of the fixed columns, then it will look at the status, the raw status, and query. This is it here. Okay, 0 means unknown, 1 means in, and 2 means out, and it goes through here. So if you're in, then it draws the background color in green. If you're out, then it draws the background color in pink, which actually comes out as a red color. And if I've got that checkbox checked there, which is dark unknown, then it changes the background color to dark gray or yellow. The other thing that I do is, I could have done this in the query, but I just wanted to show you the other thing that this grid can do. I can actually look at the value of the raw status in or out, and decide. I could do a case statement. Actually, in the real programs, I use proper properties and classes types and enumerate types. But if it's 0, then I say unknown, and if it's a in or out, then I show it in there. And the only other thing that I did was in the columns of the grid, where it says status raw, is I changed the alignment to say center, whereas everything else is left justified. Okay, so not massively complicated. Okay, now what I want to do is start off by showing you what it should look like under Windows 32-bit. So the Windows 32-bit program is very straightforward. As long as you've got a MySQL driver nearby in your local folder or something like that, then it will find the MySQL server and just work. And it will work with all versions of MySQL down to something like 3, I think. The latest version is 8 and it's got some extra bells and whistles to do with SSL and stuff like that, which most people turn off. But as you can see here, here's my my data. Now, if I just show off for a second here the speed of wall-to-wall's grid, because this grid is blindingly fast, I'm going to make it repaint all of the rows, and there are, I think, how many rows were there? We're reading 212,125 transactions, and I think there are 377 rows. So it's going to redraw 377 rows. Bearing in mind, I'm remoted into this machine, and it's quite a slow machine, and it's got a lot going on. It's running a virtual machine as well. Ready, boom, instant. That is mind-bendingly fast. I mean, I really, really admire wall-to-wall for this. There are other component manufacturers out there who've got some great grids as well, but this one I really like, because the other thing I've done is I've turned these headers on here into buttons. So at the moment, as you can see, it's all jumbled up because it's just coming out in whatever order it feels like. If I say by employee, instantly, without having to do a round trip back to the server, it will reorder that information. The wall-to-wall grid caches the data that is displaying in the background. Okay, absolutely fantastic. Really, really like that. Not terribly useful at this part because obviously I've got to go through and see the people that are in and out. But if I click on status, if I scroll down to the bottom, there's your ins and outs. Wonderful, wonderful speed on this grid. I'm extremely impressed. Very, very fast. And the caching alone really makes it worth it. But what's very cool about this, as you can see, the whole app is themed. What's very cool about this is if I say disconnect, okay, and now if I go to my Linux machine is also running PA server. So I've installed the PA server following the instructions from Embarcadero. And as I mentioned, I think on the slides already, I've installed the MySQL library, and the instructions are a little bit out of date because MySQL is a constantly moving target. You have to put version 21 of the MySQL library. But apart from that, once you've done all that, and say, here's my IP address. Okay, so PA server is running in the background. If I now go back to my program, I hit F9. It goes away and does a compile. And after a few minutes, it says, I'm going to run on the Ubuntu box. And if I go to the connection and say connect, here's my data. Now, the speed of the data being retrieved is a factor of the MySQL library and the connection across my network, and the fact that it's in a virtual machine. Excuse me. But even so, if you recall, we looked at this before, and we can scroll around and look at the various bits and bobs. Ready to make it go repaint. 1, 2, 3. Oof, instant. Absolutely astounding. Sort it by employee. Again, it's not going back and refetching that data. It's just repainting what it's already cached. So it does automatic caching. I didn't do anything to do with that. Just went ahead and did it. And if I say instead, I'd like to sort it by status, exactly the same as the Windows program. Really, really remarkable. I'm very impressed with the speed of the grid. I think it's great. Okay, so that is Linux. Now, the last program I want to show you is actually not one of mine. This is the main demo from wall to wall, and this shows the app running under OS X. Now, this is a live Mac Mini. It's a very old Mac Mini. It is running the latest OS X, and it still actually performs reasonably well. It's a little bit slower than a normal direct machine. I'm connected in remotely, but as you can see, the grid responsiveness is still very good. These are some of the features of this grid, which I'm sure Roy will talk about later as well. But it's pretty interesting that you can do this, expanding down to show detailed grids. This is laid out in a slightly kind of demo-y sort of way, I suppose. In a final product, you'd probably lay it out and do some contrast. This is the designer and me talking, but I would want to do some contrast in the grid just to make it a bit more clear on what was going on. But the ability to actually drill down like this and show detail information, say orders as this is, or in my case, if I was showing personnel information, very, very interesting. And again, I actually really like this grid. There are lots of other controls. For example, wall-to-wall have some trees that are very interesting, lots of other buttons as well. And you can see this is running in macOS, as you would expect. And in fact, if I just briefly pause for a second and swap back to my other machine, you can actually see that there it is in the debugger to the Mac OS. Now, the reason I didn't show the MySQL thing was the MySQL installation in a Mac is a real pain in the neck, to be polite. And I just wanted to show a little bit more of what this set of controls from wall to wall can do. But there it is, running in Mac, and it works perfectly fine. And you have to trust me, it works on Android as well and all the rest of it. But if I just close that, because we are in debugging directly into Mac, just for a laugh, let's run it under Windows 64, because we've shown Windows 32-bit, we've shown Linux, and we have shown the boom, come along program. We've shown it Windows 32-bit, so let's show the thing debugging away. Come on. The slowness is my computer, not my grid. And here is the demo running under Windows 64-bit. This is obviously a 64-bit laptop, but once again, if I go through and select the grid and select the master detail grid, looks slightly different just because of the way the themes are set up, because they just happen to have chosen different themes for macOS, which is one thing you do with FireMonkey. But as you can see, here's the detail grid coming up, and I really like it. It's a great grid, and I will be talking more about this grid later. The whole thing really can be cross-platform, because here it is, still running under Linux. And if I choose the grid again, exactly the same thing. In fact, it looks very similar to Mac. It just happens to have a different theme under Windows, but really like it. So there you go. We are targeting Windows, Mac OS, and Linux. This is a virtual machine, and this is Ubuntu, and all from one code base. There isn't any special trickery going on for different versions of the operating system. If you look through, you'll see it doesn't say anything like, if you're running on Windows, do this, and if you're running on so-and-so, do that. To be fair, it's not, in fact, just as I say that, I'll find a line that does do that, but it just adds some slightly different extensions if you're running mobile there. But same code base, same compiler, targeting as many different targets as we possibly can. And we could have shown iOS and Android as well. Oh, we don't have enough time. Okay, well, I hope that gave you a little flavor of going to different targets like Linux, Mac OS, and Windows. It's easy to write programs that target these different operating systems, especially desktop. There are some complications because Apple have got some very draconian rules about code signing. You need a developer account. If you don't know about that already, then go to developer.apple.com. With Linux, it's a little bit more of a mishmash because it depends on which version of Linux you're targeting. I'm actually using the FMX Linux extension, which is, if you just Google it, it'll tell there's plenty of demos out there that show you how to add that in. But apart from that, not really anything special. I could have done a regular FMX FireMonkey app, but I wanted to show the FirePower controls. Extremely interesting set of controls, and FirePower got some free trials. If you go to their website there, today I demoed the FirePower X controls, and I think Roy's going to talk about the various offers they've got on as well later. Follow Roy on twitter.com/Roy S. Wall, and also you can follow me on Twitter. It's twitter.com/punctuation. Long story why I can't use check digits, because that's everything else that I use. But if you want to know more about me and what I do, if you don't know me by now, and I'm sure if you like Delphi, you've seen me come up before, but go to about.me/Ian Barker, or go to my blog, www.code.show.com/blog. This presentation and all the slides and the various links will be up on the blog a little bit later today. It's been a very, very busy time for me at work, and so I apologize in advance. I'm normally ready before the event, but today I'm not. Okay, and now live question and answers with myself, Roy Wall, and Jim McKee. Thanks for listening, everybody.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much, Ian and Roy, for the great components, great grid, and great presentation.
Thank you. It was fun to do, and also very traumatic, as you are aware behind the scenes. These presentations are always a little bit bumpy when you go, I got to move this video around and do this and still do my day job. You know how these things are.
Yeah, it's interesting. Sorry, just aside for a second, but I always assumed that as a Embarcadero or as a member of the community that once, if I ever worked for Embarcadero, it would be great because I have all the time in the world just to watch webinars and read blog posts and write blog posts and stuff, and it didn't.
And now the horrible, horrible truth has dawned on you.
I mean, I love my job, don't get me wrong, but it's yeah, there's always so much to do, so much to do.
This is Roy from Wall to Wall. I just want to thank Ian for, I mean, he did this video and demo in such a short amount of time. I mean, I was really amazed at all he accomplished, and just want to thank him for this presentation. Really appreciate it.
Roy, absolutely no problem, Roy. And my divorce note is probably in the post from my wife, I'm sure.
That was great.
Okay, so we're gonna, if you have any questions, put them in the question panel and we will go through those now. There are a few questions here already that Roy and Ian have answered, but we will discuss some of them now in more details, as well as additional questions you might have. If you didn't catch it, the slides are available in the handout, or they will be available on Ian's website at code.show.com/blog. So there was a question here about Linux being available in what editions of RAD Studio. It is available in Enterprise or Architect. It is not available in Professional. If you do have Professional, though, you can upgrade to Enterprise or Architect if you contact sales. Other questions here about Linux. Officially it supports, the Linux support is for Ubuntu LTS, which on the website we list the previous LTS, but I'm pretty sure that the new 20 LTS is also officially supported. Although I will say that every version of Linux I've tested on, if it's a modern version of Linux, it may require some additional configuration or installation, but I've had good luck getting it to work on every version of Linux. I did a webinar a while back where I was just like, how many versions can I try it on? And I probably installed 20 different versions of Linux and got it to work on all of them.
Yeah, no, I think that's my experience as well. I actually, when I downloaded the Linux, I just picked the one that said the latest Linux and installed it. I knew that if it was going to be Ubuntu, it was probably going to work. And apart from, as I mentioned in the slides, a slight anomaly with MySQL driver, which people might not worry about. All I had to do was change 20 to 21. But apart from that, everything worked completely smoothly. I found a little problem with something, but I think that's a connection related thing. But yeah, it works. What can I say? Writing cross-platform programs with Delphi is extremely easy, and when you've got a set components like Roy's components, it looks great. Roy's grid takes a lot of work out of things like sorting that grid in by clicking on the column at the top and colorizing various lines and things like that. And I think that's the strength of Delphi is the component-based development. Somebody like Roy has sat up for many hours, I'm sure, writing all the code, and people like me come along and just use it and look very cool doing it. And actually, I haven't really done anything difficult whatsoever. I just put together a slide and talked a lot.
I just want to mention one thing that we didn't get to see today because it's didn't have time. But when you're running apps, FireMonkey apps on the mobile devices, the touch and user experience becomes so much more important because people are used to a certain way of using their fingers to scroll, using hand motions. And just want to mention that our grids and our components are designed to work smoothly and naturally on mobile devices. So things like dragging and touching and all that's going to work really well, mainly because we try to optimize the performance. Because if your grid was slow, you're not going to be able to touch drag very quickly. So that was one of the reasons why we focused on performance so much with FirePower.
Yeah, and I think when I looked at the demos on, because you've got a whole bunch of demos on YouTube and things like that as well, I specifically wanted to target desktop applications rather than mobile and all the rest of it, because there's a whole different subject. I think mobile development, there's some considerations about how you retrieve data and send it back, and lots of rules from Apple and lots of rules from Google. But I think your demos on YouTube make it quite clear that you put a lot of thought into these components, and even with the desktop experience, it's absolutely slick. It's very, very slick, very smooth, very fast, and I see no reason why that wouldn't be the same with mobile, because you've clearly got a bit of attention to detail there. It's great.
That's one of the things that I've always been a huge fan about with the community, is just the huge variety of components, and the fact that people like Roy, and Roy specifically, I mean, I've been using your components forever, spent the time to make something that works really, really well, and maintaining it for me, and I can just grab that and use it in my application and be done. Do you have videos up on your website, Roy, with demos, or is there some place people can see more information on FirePower on mobile?
Yeah, well, we do have, we started a tutorial series a couple months ago, and as far as how it runs on mobile, well, we think that video series really aren't more just how-to, so they're not really trying to show you the programs running on mobile devices. But we do have our demos on the app stores, so you can actually download a demo. I don't know if they're up to date to the current versions, but you can at least get an idea of the feel of using FirePower apps on an iOS device or on an Android device.
Okay,
and there's
fantastic.
a YouTube page too. Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So there's a question here about using your controls in portable web apps running in the browser. I don't know if you, I mean, I know that you can use the Linux to deploy to HTML, but that requires a lot of additional infrastructure as well. Do you have any browser support, HTML5 support as well, or?
Well, our products are built completely on top of FireMonkey. So FireMonkey, whatever FireMonkey supports, we'll support, but it's really meant for apps. So it's not meant for running in a browser.
All right, that's what
I think they would be talking on Linux about Broadway, which is what that does is takes the display surface of a FireMonkey app and then surfaces that up as HTML5 canvas. Yeah, and I personally, I think that would be a bad experience, because not anything to do with the controls, but just generally, you're trying to force something to work for which it's not designed. This is the biggest problem with people taking a mobile app and trying to make it into a desktop app. The two have got similar visual metaphors, but actually there's a lot of difference between the two. I don't think that people should take a mobile app and say, oh, now look, I can run it on the desktop, unless it's just, you know what I mean? It's just as a temporary thing. But the same with technology like Broadway. We looked at taking some of our commercial apps and using that kind of technology. There's a few vendors out there, I don't want to name them, but Delphi vendors who do that, and like UniGUI apps, stuff like that. I found that it would be best for our customers if we adjusted our app to make a Delphi app that's a Delphi desktop app, but is tweaked to work with the web interface. And I think that same would probably be true with apps that we use in the wall-to-wall controls. I think you would want to tweak it a little bit to get a better performance and design experience.
Way back when, shortly after, I guess, probably like XE6 time period, I was doing a live event someplace, and this guy comes up afterwards, and he says, I have this app that I developed in Delphi 1, and I've been just maintaining it for all these years, and it's making me a lot of money, and that's kind of my entire job, but I want to move it to iPad. I'm like, well, you can do that. You gotta do some other things. So he pulls the app out, and he was still using all the Windows 1 components. It looked like a Windows 3.1 application from Delphi 1. Still, I'm like, oh yeah, you're gonna have a lot of work if you're still. I mean, because there's always That's one thing I love about Delphi is that it is so backwards compatible and it's so easy to go cross-platform, but you still have to be cognizant of the platform itself, and you still have to think about things, way things are going to be different on the platforms, the way users are going to interact differently on the platforms, the way users are going to have different expectations on platforms. So yeah, it's great to have a component like FirePower, FirePower to go cross-platform with, but it works on mobile and desktop, but you still have to be cognizant of the differences on the desktop and on the desktop versus mobile. Now you can use platform services to get you a lot of the way there, but you still, it's never, so I know that a lot of times, we talk about how easy it is to go cross-platform, which is true, but I don't want to say, I want to make sure people are aware that you do have to be aware of the platform, you do have to think about things and how to get what's involved with that as well. So here's a comment about having millions of records in your grid if you're scrolling through those. Is it going to load all, if I have a database that has, a million or multi-million rows of data in it, and I want to display that in the grid and scroll through it, is it going to load all million records into memory at once and make it really slow, or how does that behave?
Well, the loading of the grid is really done at the data set level or the data source level. So the grid is just a window to that data set or data source, and you can buffer the records so it's only showing a certain amount of time. But when you're running like a query on your, say, a mobile device, it's going to run that query. So it's not going to load a partial unless you configure the query to only load partial records. So all the handling of the data is not going to be done in the grid. It's going to be done at the data set or data source level. So if you think you don't want, million records obviously wouldn't work very well on a mobile device. So you'd probably want to do some kind of caching. Then the grid would just use whatever your cached part would be. But the grid itself is going to do its own buffering internal to the amount of records that you bring back. So if you brought back 10,000 records, which actually wouldn't take that long, then that you could just play with that until user wanted more, or you set up your data set to fetch more records after, say, every 5,000 records or something.
Yeah, FireDeck does have that ability to page automatically. I was doing something the other day and had a huge amount of data I needed to load up, and I forgot that it pages by default, and I loaded it up and exported it. I'm like, this isn't all my data. It's like, oh, that's right. So I had to add a line to say retrieve it all or change the configuration. So yeah, by default, FireDeck does that paging automatically. But yeah, exactly. That's why I was pretty sure the answer was Roy, but I wanted to let you answer because I figured you'd know better. I remember way back in the day that had somebody that in a developer group, they were using your components, your grid, your VCL grid, and it was the current version at the time, and they had 1 billion records that they were pulling. This was a while back. They had to bring an external hard drive that could hold all the data on it, and he was scrolling through 1 billion records, showing how fast it was. Then talked about the idea of paging and stuff like that. So, yeah.
Yeah, it works the same way, yeah, as the VCL, because the VCL has all that same kind of data source structure.
Yep. So
I do want to mention one thing before I forget, that the coupon code for FirePower, the one that's going to be available at our store is IB FirePower 15. So I for Ian, B for Barker, FirePower 15.
Oh, Ian, you got your own discount code now.
I feel powerful. Hey, I mean, I've said before, the reason I do these videos is people say, oh, well, you're kind of doing almost like a sales thing for Delphi or the components. And you know what? I get that in some ways people might see that what I'm doing is like that, but actually that's not true. First of all, what I'm trying to do is promote Delphi and Rad Studio. First and foremost, I'm a Delphi guy, have been since day one. And I think that if you are a developer, if you want to be able to write professional applications and you want to do it as quickly as possible with the least effort possible, then Delphi and Rad Studio is the way to go. And the best thing about Delphi and Rad Studio is the massive amount of components that are available, including wall-to-walls components, because they do the work for you. And if there's a good set of components out there, if I find a bad set of components, I'm not going to talk about them. It's as simple as that. I don't want to go around and badmouth someone's life's work and their income, you know. But at the same time, if there's some that are good, or there's some here that's showing a technique that's useful to other people that may be watching the video now, then if that's seen as promoting wall-to-walls components or any of the other component vendors, TMS and all the rest of it, that's a side effect of them producing something that's useful. And that's really what it's about, is that the language is useful and makes me a productive programmer that earns a living from programming, and the components add to that productivity so that I'm not having to write a whole bunch of code just to produce a grid-like thing on the screen. Someone else has done that for me, and for a relatively small amount of money, it saves me all that time. So yeah, it's great. You know, it's good.
Yeah. I absolutely agree with you. And it's just something, you know, before I came to work at Embarcadero, I was, you know, in the same boat as Ian, and I would take my vacation time and not spend it with my family. I would go to speak at conferences and talk about how much I enjoyed Delphi or some other components, whatever, because I thought it was fantastic. And I honestly, and I still do believe this, that when I share, you know, stuff like this, just like Ian's sharing, I'm helping people be more productive and get more stuff done and better quality of life. I feel like it's, you know, I'm making the world a better place. So, and the thing about components is that the amount of money you pay Roy for these components, if they save you any time at all, it's paid for itself because your time is money, you know. So awesome stuff. Sorry, I'm getting philosophical now. Great stuff here. Let's see. Coupon IB FirePower 15 does not exist.
Did you publish it? It's on our wall-to-wall.com shopping site. I don't know which site did you go to? We have an old shopping page. If you went to that one, it wouldn't be there, but we could add to that one too. So if that's the problem.
Wall-to-wall ordering, is that where they should go?
Yeah,
or where should they go?
Not on that one, but we'll go ahead and add that after the conference. That on that site too. We have two shopping.
Okay.
And if you send it to me, Roy, I'll put it on my blog as well, so that if people go, there will be a blog post. I'm really busy today, so it's going to be later today, but I will have a blog post, and I'll put that code on so that they can go and see that code as well.
Okay, appreciate that. I will get that to you.
Okay, so depending on what link I click, I see there's two different shopping sites here, so I'll put the link in here for the shopping site. The wall-to-wall /product page /FirePower. I'm guessing that's the new one.
Wall-to-wall.com/shopping. That page will take you to the site that has a coupon code. But they're both. We'll make sure they both work in a few minutes. So
okay, great.
Don't worry about it.
There's a question here about Bull C Builder.
Oh yes. See, it says
the wall-to-wall work. Yeah.
Is it BCB5? So Board and C Builder 5, I believe. That's. Do you still support backup?
FirePower didn't exist back then. So InfoPower worked with C Builder 5, but FirePower is more modern. So it's going to be work with more maybe products in the past. I think 6 years. Delphi, not going back 20 years. With C Builder 5, you wouldn't be able to use FirePower. You have to get a more recent version of C++ Builder.
Yeah, good excuse to modernize.
So question here, do you have plans to continue to improve InfoPower, adding some of the flexibility FirePower has?
We do have some I think really cool plans for InfoPower, but we're not really ready to release that yet. It's actually going to show up in FirePower first in our next version. Then we're going to probably port that over to InfoPower. It's going to be something more like a data grouper, so a little more like ability to look at a single data set and then to group things in a tree fashion and with summaries and summaries and counts and things like that. But so we did have plans for InfoPower going that direction. And we also did a lot of recent work with trying to get to work with all the new styles and themes, and that was and 4K, and that was a really big endeavor. It affected a lot of components, and but the end result is now we're finally at that point where it's completed. So we're pretty happy with where it's at now in that respect.
Fantastic. Great. You know, it's one of those things that's interesting. You know, you see something, I mean, you see something in FirePower, and you're like, oh, I'm using VCL, what's this in InfoPower? They're different. I mean, there are some things that do make sense to put in both, I'm sure, but there are fundamental differences between FireMonkey and VCL, that some things are more suited to other things. So I'm sure there'll never be complete parity between the two.
Right, but there's a lot of overlap between the two. We're going to probably come out with a comparison chart to show you InfoPower components, FirePower components, and then we'll see which ones are the same, or terms of at least not the same, because they're going to behave a little differently, but which ones are included in both, and then which ones are not. And that'll give people a little better visual observation to see what the differences are without having to go through, you know, an explanation. But because there's a lot of similarities. They both have grids, they both have edit controls, they both have a feature our validation languages, which is picture mask and variable expressions for validation. They both have dialogues to make things easy. So FirePower was inspired by InfoPower and First Class combined, and but then it's actually gone beyond that to feature what's unique about components that would work on all the multi-device applications out there. So that's to think of it. I mean, FirePower is a lot more complex than InfoPower is, because it has to worry about a lot more than InfoPower had to worry about in terms of different platforms. But the nice thing about FirePower is that when you use FirePower, you don't have to worry about all that. That's all handled by our code, or also FireMonkey's library too. So it's a lot of work, but it's all underneath the hood for people using our products.
Yes,
I think. Oh, sorry, carry on, Jim.
I was just going to say the beauty of encapsulation. Go ahead.
Yeah, I was going to say, for those that watch this demo, if they think this is, if they saw the grid and they might think that that's the only thing that's in FirePower, there really is not the case. I've used First Class components as well before, and InfoPower I think as well. And there's an awful lot more. All I really showed was the grid and a couple of buttons. There are filter components. There's all sorts of different components that are actually probably relatively new, sort of unique amongst the component sort of what's the word I'm looking for, infrastructure, or that's not the right word, but you know what I mean, the available components that are out there. The FirePower stuff has got a lot more depth to it. I only had a short period of time. We showed quite a lot in 30 minutes. If you go to Roy's site, there's a bunch of videos that show you all the other things that you can do, and it's a lot. And you always keep seeing these components where you go, oh, I wrote a bunch of code that did that, and it took me forever. And there's a component where I could have wired it up and clicked a couple of properties, and the thing would have saved me a lifetime. So, yeah, I know now. I'll look again next time.
When I was in, sorry, another side that reminds me of when I was in high school computer science class, a friend of mine he was like, how do you do that? And he's trying to explain something, but he was never really good at explaining things. He's like, never mind, I'll just write the assembly. And so he figures out how to write this all in assembly. And then he shows me, and I'm like, oh, that's just this one line of code. And he's like, but
always Google.
Yes. But there is a skill to being able to finding that and being aware. And so all of you being here on this webinar, I mean that you're doing yourself that service, and that you're going to watch this, and then in the future you'll be like, oh, I need that, and then you'll be able to use it and take advantage of it and save yourself so much time.
Google is your friend.
Yes, and there is skills behind being able to find the things, find the search terms you're looking for. Okay. Wait. Was a question about installing Linux versions. The button being grayed out. What was it? Said.
Yeah, they were asking, they said they had some components and they installed them in their IDE. And when they swapped to Linux, the components are grayed out in the component palette. And they said, what did they need to do to the components to make them appear under Linux? And I said, Roy probably has an answer to that.
I do. I'd have to look at, just basically when you define your component, you tell it what platforms it supports. And there's a little tag that tells the compiler PIF all, and that'll means it supports all platforms. And
Isn't
to use that,
isn't it on the package manager or something like that as well? I think there's a property on there where you say what it targets. I seem to remember.
I think all we did was it's in our source code when the component's actually defined. It's like a little template. I can just type it up. I'll look it up and just type it into the chat if that would help. Well, I can look at it later. I'm switching windows. I'm just not finding my Delphi right now.
Yeah, it sounds like a blog post.
Yeah, exactly. But yeah, you can just message us. I can share you the code, or you can have our source code already. You can just look at our components and you'll see it.
There you go. That's something I love so much about Delphi and the ecosystem is that you have access to all the source code. I mean, it's so useful when you're trying to understand how something behaves or debug something, but also when you are like, I want to do this. How do I do that? And you're like, oh, that's how I do that, and not to trivialize the effort that goes into these components, because a lot of times I look at that and I'm like, I'm glad I don't have to write that, but it's good to be able to look into that and figure that out and understand what's going on as much as possible.
Yeah, the source code's critical, even for me as a component developer. When I have the source code, I mean, it makes my job so much easier to understand the component that I'm trying to use, and then to know what's virtual or what I hoped would be virtual, but it's not, things like that. But I think source code is critical, not just for having the source code, but to understand fully how to use and maybe subclass components for your own needs.
Well, as an application developer, particularly as a contractor, which I tend to be most of the time, for me, having the source code is also about future-proofing your contract with the customer, because a lot of them say, well, what happens if you die? and I get a little bit worried when they say that, like, why? But they are using the typical what if you fell under a bus scenario. And the answer is, if they've got the source code available in escrow, usually, because you don't want to give away, throw away the baby with the bathwater. But if they've got the ability to actually access that source code for the components and something goes wrong, and wall-to-wall software has been annexed by some country and Canada or somewhere like that, and you're no longer allowed to sell or something because we go to war with Canada, who knows? But at least having the source code available means that, first of all, the customer has access to the source code for the actual product, but also they can go to the components and fix something that goes wrong, because sometimes components go out of fashion, or the vendor decides to go in a different direction, or they decide they're not going to sell components anymore. With the source code available, if something breaks and you can't get to the original vendor anymore, you can fix it yourself. And that's my kind of take on what the benefit is of this source code being.
Yep, and all our products do come with runtime source code. So
cool, and a phone, excellent.
And a phone, yeah.
So I was gonna two things about that. I have was talking to their MVP that does a lot of contract work as well, and he says what he does is he sets up uses Amazon. I can't remember what it's called, but Amazon is this thing where you can it's desktops as a service essentially, and he sets up a different desktop for each of his clients, and he has it set up so that he can just give that to them. So it has all the source code, everything set up to build, everything like that. And so, when he starts contracting with somebody, they pay for a new license. So he has multiple licenses, and he just does the license transfer to them, whatever he needs to do, so that it just become assumed by that person, which I thought was kind of interesting way. Just that way he can make sure that there's that sustainability. But the other thing is that I was done some contract work a while ago for somebody that was moving to a new version of Delphi, and they said they usually have a rule, they only buy components with source code, but they had one set they didn't buy with source code, and wouldn't you know it, that's the one that went out of business, is no longer available. So I had to I used a what's it called, adapter pattern on it, I guess, to make it work with a different library so that they could just swap the other library in without having to change all the code. Worked out, but
Ooh, fancy design patterns, very cool.
yeah. Anyway, I think that's it for questions. There was a question here about, actually, I did put some answers to this, but maybe Roy or Ian, you have some ideas about how to deal with your environment path getting too long on Windows, especially when you're installing a lot of stuff as a developer. You tend to have a lot of things on your path. Any tips you guys have for dealing with that?
I haven't run into it in a while. I'm not sure why, but I just had to edit it. But maybe there's tricks you can do. I don't know.
The way I deal with it is I actually create a directory called comps, C-O-M-P-S, and put all my components in there. Because I found over the years that a lot of components get installed in program files, and which reminds me, I must mention something to you, Roy, about your demos being installed in program files, because under Windows 10 they have a little bit of an issue there. But anyway, but
they're actually in the public directory. I mean, they're in both places.
Maybe I installed them in the wrong place. Yeah, but there you go. It was nothing spectacular. But the way I always do it, I just put them in comps, because I found that, first of all, I know then where all my components are, and secondly, it's a very short path, so I can get to them. But you can use variable substitution and stuff like that. But it's a problem that hopefully one day will be resolved, so that the issue of long paths will disappear. But I wait in vain right now, I think.
There is a registry setting, I believe, you can do for that. I put a link in for that you can change a registry setting that changes the Windows path limit. And then there's a utility called Rapid Environment Editor, which I believe is written in Delphi, if I remember correctly, that has some useful things in it too for fixing that too. So. Okay, well, I think we're done. Thank you so much, everybody, for joining us. Thank you, Ian, for this fantastic presentation, as usual. And thank you, Roy, like I said, for making these fantastic components available and, just contributing to everybody's productivity in making everybody a better developer.
Thank you, Jim. Thank you, Ian.
Appreciate it. No, you're welcome. Thanks, everybody, for attending. We'll see you another time.
All right, bye, everybody.
Hey, bye.